They said you shouldn't be reviewing movies. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. Let me guess. You enjoy the new Color Purple movie. They got me with that one because absolutely I enjoyed it.
This video is in honor of The Color Purple. With the theatrical release of the musical coming in a week. When is Christmas? Today is Wednesday. In less than a week, it will be in theaters. I've never read the book, and I'm realizing I don't think I've ever watched the movie. Don't Come For Me. I started reading the book today, and I was like, have I ever actually seen this, or have I just seen clips on the internet? I've seen the play, the musical, on stage twice. I was really young. I think the first time I was in middle school, and then the second time I was maybe 21, 22. I'm 30 now. So it's been quite some time since I saw it. But I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, do I only know the story because I've seen the play? Or have I seen the movie? And so I'm going to start watching the movie. I actually already started watching it. I know I'm kind of doing this out of order. Usually I like to read the book first. But I'm going to read it and hopefully finish it in the next couple of days. But for now, as I do chores, because I don't want to be too saddened by this. It's already really sad. Silly just got sent off to get married. And that's depressing. But yeah, as I was watching that take place, her being sent away, given up by her dad, I was like, I truly don't think I've seen this movie before. So I'm gonna watch it. And that's the plan. I'll check back with you later. I'm finally back to talk about the movie. It's been a minute, but I did watch it, and I don't think that I saw it before, which is wild to me because there are scenes that I remember. But I don't know if it's because I've like seen clips on the internet, so it had an impact, or if I've actually seen the movie. I don't think I did because I had no idea Lawrence Fishburne was in it. And then this actor whose name I can't remember, who I loved, I can't remember anything right now. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie that I saw him in. A Soldier's Story or something with Denzel Washington, which is a classic if you haven't seen it. But I also did not know that he was in The Color Purple. And so that leads me to believe that I did not know, I had not seen this movie before. So I'm glad that I finally did. I won't say much more about it. It's a fantastic movie, of course. There are some parts where the acting maybe isn't great with the younger girls when they're younger. Just my opinion. And I, of course, as most people, have thoughts about Steven Spielberg being the director of this movie. But I also know that back then when this movie was being made, they were not going to put a black director in that chair. So we get the movie or we don't. And I'm glad we did at the end of the day. Pop Culture Happy Hour, the podcast, actually has an episode about the impact and some of the criticism and the feelings that were brought up for people about The Color Purple being turned into a film back then. And so I will put that in the description so you can go listen to it. I highly recommend it. It gets a lot deeper than I'm going to right now into what people's feelings were at the time. And yeah, so go listen to that. I will be back shortly. Not shortly. I'm going to have a seat so we can talk about the book. Let's do it. I unfortunately can't find the notes that I was writing as I was reading this book, which is annoying. But anyway, let's get into The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I want to talk about how the book is written a little bit because I think it's interesting. It isn't really split up into chapters, but they are split into letters that Celie, or prayers, I should say, to God. Every section, it's like a little vignette, and it starts as Dear God, and then Celie goes on to talk about what she's been experiencing. And then towards the end, when she starts writing letters to her sister, it transitions to that. She's saying, Dear Nettie. And the book does talk about Celie's relationship with God and her perspective of like, if God was real, would I be going through the things that I'm going through? Which I think is really an important conversation. And I think, a bigger religious conversation that we don't need to have here today, but important nonetheless. So this book, I didn't think the book could be much sadder than the movie, which I keep underestimating, and I need to stop doing that. But this book was much sadder than Color Purple, the movie. There are some points that are kind of left out of the movie. Like, I think one really significant point is more about Harpo's experience. Do I have the right name? Yes, Harpo. This is Celie's stepson, and he lost his mom. His mom was killed by her boyfriend when he was a child. And I think it's such an important part of his story. He is really sad and really looking for guidance on how to be a man from this really broken man who is his father, and has a hard time and is trying to figure out how to be a husband and gets terrible advice and ends up damaging his marriage in the process. And I think hearing about his pain really humanizes his character in a way that the movie doesn't. So that's really sad. The book also gives more detail about what Nettie's life in Africa is like. And I love that part. Celie finally gets these letters and is able to connect with her sister. Oh my God, I want to cry even thinking about it. I'm such a soft person. But it really adds to a story in the way that the movie misses out on doing. And I think it's really beautiful to be able to learn about Nettie's experience in Africa raising Celie's children. As emotional as the end of this book was for me, it truly does have a happy ending. And I have such a positive perception of The Color Purple as a whole. And I think one, that's because my first kind of remembrance of The Color Purple was seeing the musical on stage, which is a more, I don't want to say joyful, but it's a happier spin. I don't think it's as dark as the movie is, from what I can recall. Mind you, this was years ago that I saw it. But that left a more joyful impression in my mind. And so I've never been like, when people are like, oh my God, I don't want to watch that, it's so dark, all I can think about is the happy ending that comes from the book and the movie. In the end, Celie is reconnected with her sister, which when I read it, I cried my eyes out, but I was so happy for them. She reconnects with her ex-husband as well. He's a terrible person, treats her like a dog, for lack of a better word, but she is able to befriend him towards the end of the book, which I think is a really important storyline that isn't shown in the same way, if I'm remembering correctly, in the movie. I am curious to see how all of this is portrayed in the musical. I don't expect the musical to be that good from what critics are saying. It's February 22nd or 23rd right now, or it's January 22nd right now. The movie comes out on the 26th here in the UK, which, again, my biggest culture shock living here is when I am here is the movies not coming out at the same time. I was in America all last year, like, oh, it comes out on Christmas Day. I was telling my boyfriend, I'm like, Boxing Day, we're going to the movies to see The Color Purple. And I couldn't because it wasn't released yet. And it still hasn't been. Anyway, so I will be going to see that on Friday. Again, I lost my notes. I'm sure there was more I had to say, but that's all that is coming to me right now. But I'll be back once I've seen the movie, and I'll see you then. I finally watched The New Color Purple, but before we get into my thoughts about it, let's talk about Alice Walker. Alice Walker is an American novelist. Over the course of her career, she has written over a dozen novels and short stories, including The Color Purple, which she was the first African-American woman to win a Pulitzer Prize for. Along with her Pulitzer Prize, she also won a National Book Award in 1983. One thing I learned while reading this book is that The Color Purple has spin-offs. There is a Color Purple collection including 2 other books. I want to call them spin-offs and not a series. The Color Purple, I don't think, is a part of a series because the other 2 books are not about Celie. So I want to call them spin-offs, but somebody correct me in the comments. But the other 2 books are titled The Temple of My Familiar and Possessing the Secret of Joy. I have yet to read these books, but they are definitely on the list because The Color Purple was a fantastic read, obviously. My boyfriend asked me about the title when I was reading this book. He was like, why is it called that? And I had no idea, but I hadn't gotten to the point where the quote comes up in the book, so let's read it. In the book, Celie and Shug Avery are walking through a lavender field, and Shug Avery says, "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." I will have an article linked below so you can learn more about Alice Walker and her works, but let's get into the movie. Before we start, someone commented on one of my previous videos, the one about Poor Things, which I've talked about. They said, "You shouldn't be reviewing movies. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. Let me guess, you enjoy the New Color Purple movie." They got me with that one because absolutely I enjoyed it. People are acting like this movie has been panned by critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 84 or 85%. And on Metacritic, it has a 72%, which is notoriously harsher for all movies. Since when is 85% bad? If I got an 85% on a college paper, I would have been celebrating, okay? 85% is not bad. And then on Rotten Tomatoes, the viewers' reviews, I don't know what they're called, but ordinary people going to go see the movie and rating it on Rotten Tomatoes are giving it a 95. So The Color Purple musical movie is a fantastic film. And so let's talk about it. Of course, it has its flaws, and we will get into that as well. But I want to tell you, I'm looking at my notes, all the great things I loved about this movie. First, the cast was stacked. And I could spend an hour going through this cast, but there were a few surprises that I was very happy to see. If you saw my If Beale Street Could Talk video, then you would know that I am a stan for Aujane Ellis Taylor, and she makes an appearance in this film as Celie's mother, and it was just a delight to see her. She's only in it for 2 scenes, but I loved seeing her. We also got Whoopi Goldberg making an appearance. If you don't know, she was the original Celie in the original film. And so seeing her kind of playing a midwife, let's say, as young Celie is delivering one of her children, I almost started crying as soon as I saw her appear on the screen. I was like, what a beautiful moment. Oh, I loved it. David Alan Grier played Shug Avery's father. He's also the reverend of the church in the town. And he sang for a moment, and I almost burst into tears. I almost cried so many times watching this movie. Why am I so soft? It was just so beautiful. I did not expect him to sing, and I was delighted. All of the main cast was also excellent, of course. Everyone did an amazing job. Except, let's get into the 3 casting things that I have issue with. Maybe it's 4, actually. So the smallest thing, her plays Squeak. And obviously in the book, Squeak has more parts. But she doesn't really, anyway, her character is very small in this film. And she only sings 1 time, if I'm not mistaken. She sings like 2 lines in this whole movie. And I'm like, how do you have such a strong voice in this film and it's only heard 1 time? I don't know, especially Squeak is a singer. I was just surprised by that. Second, I don't even know this man's name. John Baptiste plays Shug Avery's husband. And he's like being the piano man that he is, but his acting was awkward. Like, there were parts where I was just like, this is because he's a star and not because he's an actor, obviously. Third bone I have to pick is with Tamela Mann. I'm sorry, I love you. Tamela Mann is a gospel goddess. And she has a fantastic voice, is an understatement. But her acting and she is like, the opening number is her song, and the performance just it felt awkward. It felt really awkward. And I think that is what gives people a sour taste in their mouths about this film, because I do think the directing in the beginning of the movie was not great. The transitions were not great. Anyway, we'll get more into that. Fourth bone I have to pick is with Coleman Domingo. And again, if you saw my If Beale Street Could Talk video, you know I love this man. I would die for him. That's not true. But I do love Coleman Domingo. I'm so excited that he is nominated for an Oscar for his role in the film Rustin. But his acting in this, I was not convinced. Him playing Mr. was just not it. And he put on this accent that just was not good. And I was like, why did they have this man do that? It ruined every scene that he was in for me for the first half of the movie. Eventually, the accent kind of faded. I don't know what happened, but he got better, I guess. But that was not good. And lastly, I guess I have 5 bones to pick. Taraji P. Henson's lip syncing was terrible. Every scene that she sang in, the timing was just off. And I'm confused. I've never seen her other works where she has sung. So when I found out that she was going to be in this movie, I was like, when did Taraji P. Henson learn how to sing? But she's done it before, so I don't know why I was surprised. But then I left the theater being like, was that her? Or did they pull a High School Musical and put Taraji on somebody else's voice? No shade. It's just the lip syncing was terrible. But everyone else in the cast was fantastic, spectacular. Seeing Sierra show up at the end, there is a point where the narration turns into Sierra narrating because Celie finds her letters, obviously, and so she's reading off the letters. And it's just, I could not, in the same way, people were talking about how they wanted to cast Beyonce or Rihanna in this movie and how ridiculous that would be because you would only be able to see them as Beyonce and Rihanna and not as characters in this film. I feel the same way about Sierra. I couldn't picture Sierra living in Africa raising children. And so when she showed up, even though they aged her really well, she looked older as she should for the character, but her voice is just too iconic in my brain, and so it took me out of it. As I was saying before, some of the transitions in this film felt a little clunky and awkward, and I want to blame that on the fact that this director directed music videos, and so the musical numbers often felt like a music video rather than a part of the film. So this film was directed by Blitz the Ambassador. That's his stage name. Obviously, his government name is Samuel, and he is from Accra, Ghana. I know that he directed Beyonce's Black is King music video movie situation. I don't know what you want to call it, but I believe this is his first time directing a full-length film. I stand corrected. He also directed The Burial of Kojo in 2018, which is a Ghanaian film that I haven't seen. I would be interested to see it, but watching it feels like it was directed by, I don't want to say a first-time director because he obviously has done other work, but it doesn't feel like he has directed musical movies, at least. I think it's completely different in my mind to direct music videos versus directing movies. And so you get this feeling, the transitions just they're awkward. And it really ruined the first quarter of the movie. There's also some editing things that really were not visually appealing to me. There's one scene, as I said, Anjanae Ellis Taylor is playing Celie's mom, and there's a scene where Celie is looking into a mirror and her mom's kind of ghost is behind her and puts her hand on her shoulder, and it just felt edited. Like, rather than filming her do this action, it felt like they green screened her into the scene somehow. I don't know how to describe this, but it did not look good. There's also a scene where Celie is looking into the window at her child, and then the window turns into this scene of imprisoned men. You know, back in the day, they used to... how do you describe what they used to do? They would take the axe picks and break rocks in prison movies. I don't know. Anyway, that's what shows up on the window. And then she's transported into this scene and everyone's dancing. That was awkward. I didn't get it. But anyway, not that I need to get it, but the transition itself, that showing up on the window it was not good. But just my opinion. So yeah, I do think if there was a more experienced director who directed this film, it probably would have been better, but it was still good. So no shade. it was still a beautiful movie. A little bit about the changes that were made to the characters. Just one thing, really. In the book and in the original movie, Harpo is trying to figure out how to make Sophia listen to him, how to make her a better wife and really like respect him. So he attempts to put hands on her and she fights back, obviously. But in this movie, he shows up with a knot in his head before Celie tells him to go beat her. And I don't understand, like it seemed like they were trying to make Sophia's character abusive when in the book and in the movie she's defending herself. So I didn't like that part. Didn't like it at all. One thing I did like was Harpo being more like, I'm gonna stand up to my paw. No. Harpo stands up for himself more against his father throughout the movie, which I think is beautiful. He's not this like scared man-child that he is in the book and in the original movie, which was lovely to see. And then Mr. makes the decision to change. In the book, eventually with space, so Celie leaves Mr., and with time and space, they're able to form a friendship. In the movie, I think a similar thing happens. Like one day they just start being around each other again and it's fine. But in the musical, he loses everything. He has to burn down his fields where he's growing. I don't know what exactly. And he's crying, drunk crying on the floor in the rain like, I'm a change. He makes the decision to change. And he goes to Celie and he doesn't necessarily apologize, but he's nice. And she's like, okay, we can be friends. And I really appreciate seeing that change happen for him. Like seeing what he was going through and knowing that he was like, yes, I do need to change, rather than it just kind of happening. I read this book once. It's about relationships, but it talks about sliding versus deciding. And I feel like in the book and in the first movie, they kind of slide into this friendship. Whereas in this one, there is a decision made by Mr. to change and befriend Celie. He does try to get back with her in the book and in this movie. And she's like, nah, let's be friends. I've said multiple times already, I almost cried 10 million times while watching this movie. I think Danielle Brooks, seeing her in prison broke my heart, or she's in like a local jail. And seeing her there crying made me almost cry. I didn't quite cry yet. But when Fantasia looks into the camera while singing I'm Here, she's deadpanning into that camera singing I'm Here. I couldn't stop crying. I cried for the rest of the movie because it was so beautiful and so touching, and she did a fantastic job. There is the one scene where she's like cursing. She's cursing Mr. and she puts her hand out and she says, until you do right by me, everything you blah, blah, blah is gonna blah, blah, blah. And that felt awkward because she's doing this thing. I don't know whose decision that was, but I didn't like it. But other than that, Fantasia did a fantastic job, which I think is important to note because this is her first film. Technically, this is her first theatrical film. She did play herself in a Lifetime movie back in the day, which is ridiculous. I've seen it, whatever. But this is the first time that she's done a movie of this sort. She did play Celie on stage on Broadway. I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that acting on stage and acting in a film is not the same. But for her first movie, I think she did a fantastic job. Maybe I think this movie is so good because I went in with lower expectations. I knew the star of the movie had only done one Lifetime movie in the past, and I knew the director, or I thought the director had only done music videos in the past. So I was like, this isn't Steven Spielberg. Once I found out actually that Steven Spielberg was not directing, I was like, okay, let me lower my expectations because it's not Spielberg. And so I think people just went in with extremely high expectations, and sometimes you just gotta adjust them in order to enjoy the movie. But back to Fantasia, she did a great job. I cried when she sang I'm Here. I cried when Sierra, her sister, Nettie, that's her name, when Nettie showed up with the kids. bawled my eyes out, and then proceeded to sit through the credits and cry some more. There were only 7 people in the theater. I went to an early showing. I went to like a 3 p.m. showing on a Friday, so everyone was at work. But I was embarrassed. I was like crying in this empty movie theater. But it was beautiful. And then I got on the train home and I just listened to I'm Here on repeat for 30 minutes because I wasn't done yet. I had to still just sit in that. Anyway, it was a beautiful movie. For all of the people saying this movie was not good, you're wrong. And that's it. If you don't like musicals, that's one thing. There are some ways it could have been better, obviously. But I think 85, again, I don't think 85 is a bad score. And I think it's an appropriate score for this movie. So if you've seen it, leave your comments below. Let me know your thoughts. And next week, we will be talking about American Fiction because it's finally going to be released in the UK on Friday. I'm currently reading the book Erasure by Percival Everett, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So I look forward to talking to you more about that next week. I'll see you then.